All right, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. And today we're going to be diving into a very serious topic, specifically how grifters in the conspiracy space are trying to exploit the tragedy of Charlie Kirk's assassination for their own purposes. But before we get into all that, I got to remind you, I got to give you the reminder. You got to like this, you got to share this, and you got to subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. That way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new episode. Also, do me a huge favor. If you could spare maybe 10 to 15 seconds, give me a review on whatever podcast app you're using to listen to this. Give just a few sentences explaining to people why this podcast is awesome and why you love it so much and why they just have to listen to it. I appreciate that. That's going to help me with the algorithm and all that good stuff. Also, check out my Substack. It's called Chasing Liberty. You can access that at libertychasers.com. And you can see all of my writings and my videos and my podcasts on everything pertaining to liberty. Now then, now without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this. And before we do, I'm just going to make something very clear. This episode is not about defending the government or its official story on the assassination of Charlie Kirk. If you guys have followed me for any length of time, you know I despise our government and I know that it lies all the time. Now, I'm not saying that everything that they say is a lie because they don't always have to lie. Sometimes the truth is enough to help them grow their power. So when you're listening to me talk about these conspiracy theories, just keep in mind this isn't really about defending the government. This is also about bringing attention to the fact that you shouldn't only be questioning the government, you should be questioning everybody. I mean, we have a lot of major institutions that routinely lie to you, and the government is just one of them. You also have the media, is what I'm going to be talking about here. So I want you to question power. I want you to challenge authority. That's what I do every single day. But the questioning also needs to expand outside of the government as well. If somebody on the internet is, quote, just asking questions while conveniently building their following, generating outrage, getting clout, clicks, and cash, then they should also be questioned because in some ways they can be just as harmful as the government. In fact, in a lot of ways, they work for the government, whether they know it or not. So let's go ahead and dive on in. So you guys saw what happened after the death of Charlie Kirk. There was an outpouring of grief coming from really from both sides, from the right and the left. I mean, there were a lot of people on the left celebrating or downplaying or mocking his death. I understand that. But most regular people expressed their condolences and expressed their grief. They were just as shocked as pretty much everybody on the right was as well. Even though they didn't agree with Charlie Kirk's arguments or his ideas, they didn't want him dead. But what we also saw happen maybe like 5 seconds after the news broke about the shooting, you saw the usual suspects jump into action to spread conspiracy theories about his death. Now, note, not only am I not necessarily just defending the government here, I'm not even saying all conspiracy theories are bad. There are some that I believe, but it's important to put these conspiracy theories into their proper context, especially when you have people essentially standing on Charlie Kirk's corpse to push this stuff. So you had people like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Nikki Fuentes, and many others who immediately turned Kirk's assassination into fuel for their favorite conspiracy theories. And you know what it was. You know who their target is. It's Israel and the Jews. Because of course it was. These people think that if they get up out of their bed and they stub their toe while they're walking to the bathroom, somehow it's the Jews' fault. Benjamin Netanyahu was behind it. Speaking of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, you've got people like Nikki Fuentes who are claiming without evidence that the prime minister of freaking Israel offered Charlie Kirk $150 million so that he would continue supporting Israel. And this will become a little bit more clear later, but the whole theory is that Charlie Kirk was about to turn on Israel, even though he has been like the main proponent of the Jewish state ever since he's been a prominent figure on the right. There are others who are spinning these narratives about him secretly converting to Catholicism, or at least considering it. Yeah, some of that stuff has already been debunked, but that doesn't matter when it comes to conspiracy grifters. They've got debates and questions about how he was shot, the gun that was used, the caliber, whether there was an exit wound or not. And a lot of these questions are reasonable. I'm not knocking everybody who's talking about this, but some of these questions are valid. But then there are others who are intimating or insinuating that he was killed by the Israeli government, that they somehow orchestrated this whole thing. And I'm sorry, I know this is a serious issue, but I can't really say that with a straight face because of how ridiculous it sounds. So here's the thing. Here's the thing about all these theories and these people saying that Israel was involved or that they were trying to blackmail Charlie Kirk into turning on Israel. Here's what all of these theories have in common. None of them have a shred of evidence backing them up. But here's the thing, that doesn't matter when it comes to this stuff. The point is getting an engagement. And these people know how to hook you in emotionally and then monetize your attention. They're not truth seekers. They're content creators, and a lot of them are grifters who traffic in drama, in doubt, and in innuendo, and all that good stuff. So what I'm going to do in this segment is I'm going to go through some of the main tactics that conspiracy grifters use to get your much coveted clicks and clout, and in a lot of cases, your money. So the first one I'm going to discuss is known as, you guessed it, just asking questions. Now you've heard people say that a lot, like especially people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and a bunch of others. They're not the only ones. And what this tactic involves is making a statement in the form of a question. Instead of saying Israel's government assassinated Charlie Kirk, you might say, well, is it possible that maybe the Mossad had something to do? Mossad is Israel's intelligence agency, for those who don't know. Is it possible that Mossad agents actually orchestrated this attack or carried it out themselves? We can't leave anything off the table. We have to consider all angles. I'm just asking questions. We should be able to ask questions about this, guys. That's kind of what it sounds like. So here's an example when it pertains to what happened to Charlie Kirk. There was a podcaster named Sam Parker who made a post on X, and it said, quote, "Did Israel orchestrate the viral explosion of the Irina Zarutska story to set up the assassination of Charlie Kirk?" Now, for those who don't know about the Irina Zarutska story, this was Irina Zarutska was a Ukrainian woman in Charlotte, North Carolina, who was sadly and brutally murdered, stabbed to death on a subway by a black man. So a lot of right-wing influencers exploited her death to basically attack black people and try to make people who look like me to portray us as inherently violent, that my culture is violent, yada, 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 yada. I'm not going to get deep into that right now. I'm just kind of explaining what that is so that you know what I'm talking about here. So this guy asked whether that story was blown up or to set up the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Note, he didn't say that. He just asked a question. Now, I don't know this guy personally. Maybe he actually is wondering this, or maybe he's putting a statement in the form of a question because he knows people will click on it. It could be either way. He might not have that bad intention. I'm just kind of using what he said as an illustration of how this works. Now, there's also Candace Owens who did the same thing. And here's how this works, because when you frame a statement in the form of a question, that gives you a level of deniability. So if somebody calls you on it, you can say, well, no, I'm not arguing that Israel orchestrated Charlie Kirk's death. I was just asking questions. So she, I believe this was on her podcast. She said, quote, "It's crazy how I never once said that Israel murdered Charlie Kirk, but the Zionists are all repeating that without a shred of evidence." You see how that works? It's gaslighting. It's a rhetorical device, and it's pretty effective unless you learn to spot it. But in this way, she can say anybody who calls her out for insinuating that Israel killed Charlie Kirk, you can insinuate that they're the bad guys because they're saying this without evidence. I didn't say that happened. I was just asking whether it happened, because there's obviously a huge difference, depending on how you look at this. Now, obviously, these people are trying to say that Israel took out Charlie Kirk. I mean, come on, it's common sense, but they're not going to outright say it because they're cowards and because they know that they'll be easier to debunk if they actually make that statement. This way, they can kind of avoid getting debunked at all because they can just say that they weren't saying it, even though they were saying it. Now, and here's my thing. I don't know whether Candace Owens actually believes this is what happened, but it doesn't matter whether they actually believe it because they're going to say it whether it's true or not. They're going to say it whether they know it or not because it's not really about getting to the truth. It's about getting clout, clicks, and cash. When it comes to conspiracy grifters, honesty isn't really a priority. And here's the second tactic that a lot of conspiracy grifters use. I call it the burden reversal game. Basically, you flip the burden of proof. Now, anybody who has engaged in debate or conversations about politics, they know that when you make a claim, the burden of proof is on you to back that up with some evidence or some facts or what have you. So for example, let's say I made a claim that Charlie Kirk was assassinated by a group of shape-shifting lizard people. Now, that should be on me to prove that, right? But if I were a conspiracy grifter, I would flip the script. I would say, oh, well, prove that he wasn't assassinated by a shape-shifting lizard person. I'm trying to make you have to disprove what I said, even though I offered no evidence. And it's amazing because it's such an obvious ploy, but it still works, especially with people who don't really think critically. They think, oh, well, you can't prove it didn't happen, so maybe it did. Here's the thing. So here's an example, actually. A guy named Tom Renz on Twitter. He posted the following tweet. I'm going to call it tweet. I know it's not called Twitter anymore, but I don't care. I'm going to alternate between X and Twitter. So what? Anyway, he said, quote, "No exit wound for Charlie Kirk. I'm sorry, but with that gun, it isn't a miracle. It's evidence the whole thing is a conspiracy." Is it? I mean, he didn't really prove anything. He just said that it's impossible to do that with the gun. Did he quote any ballistics experts? Did he speak with a medical examiner? No, he didn't do any of those things. He just assumed and then demanded that you and I have to explain why that could have happened. I'm not a medical professional, but you know what? I've been seeing some who actually are saying that it is not likely, but it is possible. So to me, this is where I'm going to wait for the autopsy results to come out so that we know for sure. But we do know from Charlie Kirk's best friend and the producer of his podcast, who actually spoke with the professional that examined him after the tragic shooting, and he said that the bullet didn't go through. So here we go. But anyway, these people are using a classic misdirection. They're putting the onus on you, the doubter, to prove that what they're saying is wrong. That ain't how it works. I'm going to tell you right now, if somebody is making claims like these and they're making them over and over again, but they're not providing evidence, you should be giving them the side eye. You should be questioning them. They may actually be right. It's possible, but we can't afford to assume that these people are telling the truth just because it sounds like it might be plausible. Make them back it up. And again, I'm not saying that there aren't valid questions about whether the bullet passed through Kirk, or if it remained in his body, but there isn't enough to conclusively claim that it did go through, and that just magically expecting other people to disprove a theory that you can't prove. This is a clear sign that there might be some grifting going on. The third tactic involves something called anchoring and pattern seeking. Now, as humans, we are wired to notice and find patterns. It's how we've survived for so long. And these grifters will exploit that instinct. So we notice patterns about different things that happen. If there's a pattern, then we use that to kind of predict what might happen in the future. In this instance, if you're a caveman and you see a guy get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, you know that you might want to stay away from a saber-toothed tiger because that's a pattern. Might get you too. So that's happening actually here with Charlie Kirk, with his death. So Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, a bunch of others are claiming that Kirk was being pressured after giving maybe even just a modicum of criticism of Israel. Again, Charlie Kirk was a major Israel supporter, but there were times where he questioned what they were doing and even questioned the idea that people shouldn't be allowed to criticize the Israeli government. And he was right. I agree with him on that. And so he was supposedly pressured to continue supporting Israel to toe the line. So also, but here's the thing. He also had Dave Smith, a libertarian podcaster and comedian who was very anti-Israel. Kirk had him on his podcast about 2 months before he was killed, and they had a little debate about the issue, and that was it. But it was a friendly debate. About a month later, there was a meeting that billionaire Bill Ackman hosted at his home. I believe it was at his home, but it involved a few different influencers. Charlie Kirk was one of them, and the theory is that they used this meeting as an intervention to bully Kirk into supporting Israel and into not criticizing its government. Now, a bunch of other influencers who were there actually came out and said that the meeting happened, but this whole intervention wasn't a thing. So the meeting did happen. That's true. So they're anchoring it to something that did happen. He actually did have Dave Smith on his podcast, who was anti-Israel. So those are facts. But here's what they'll do. They'll take something that really happened, something that's real, and then they'll use that to prove something that it doesn't really prove, right? I mean, just because he had Dave Smith on his podcast doesn't mean he was turning on Israel. Just because he went to a meeting where maybe Israel might have been discussed doesn't mean that he was turning on Israel. On top of that, if you think about this critically, this is politics. So major donors donate to people who are going to push the agenda that they want pushed. So yeah, of course there were people asking him to make sure he supports Israel. If he started to question, like he got into trouble because he had Tucker Carlson, who was anti-Israel, speak at one of Turning Point USA's events, and he did it anyway, right? So to me, yeah, this is normal politics. There's nothing weird here. Yet the conspiracy grifters will use this as evidence that Israel assassinated him when it doesn't actually prove that at all. Because even when he was having Tucker Carlson speak at these events, even though he was hosting Dave Smith on his podcast, he still remained very much pro-Israel. And that you only have to watch his videos. If you go to YouTube and find the statements he's made about Israel, it's clear that he was a supporter. There was no sign that he was turning on Israel. So if they're making that statement, they should have to back it up, but they can't. So they use this technique to make it sound like they're giving evidence when they really aren't. The next tactic I'm going to talk about is actually something that both grifters and politicians love, and that's called vague language. See, grifters and politicians, but I repeat myself, they love vague language because it means you can't really nail them down to a specific idea or a specific topic or a specific arguments. The thing is, if you make a specific argument, then it's more vulnerable to being debunked. Whereas a vague statement, that's not necessarily the case. Now, politicians love to put vague language into legislation because that means that they can make these laws apply wherever they want. But they also like vague statements because, again, they're harder to debunk. So you might hear things like, Charlie Kirk was under immense pressure from billionaires that he took money from. I can't remember whether that was Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson who said that. Okay, that might be true. Maybe he was under immense pressure. But should we take that at face value? Maybe we should ask some questions. Which billionaires are we talking about here? They said billionaires plural. So it's more than just Bill Ackman, right? So give me some names. Who else was pressuring him? How does that person feel about Israel? How much money were they giving him? What did they say to pressure him? What were they doing? Was it just a friendly phone call saying, "Hey, you know what? We really appreciate you, supporting Israel," or did they threaten to blackmail him or something like that? What do you mean? Because without those specifics, that statement doesn't mean anything. Like, you can pressure somebody without doing something wrong or doing something illegal or shady. Tucker Carlson, he said that Charlie Kirk was, quote, tormented until the day that he died about whether he should support Israel or not because he was supposedly turning on Israel. Okay, all right, he was tormented until the day he died. By who? Who was tormenting Charlie Kirk over Israel? What actions did they take to torment him? Did they threaten him? Did they, I don't know, play pranks on him when he wasn't looking at him? I mean, what does that mean? What does that mean? The thing is, Carlson didn't specify because of course he didn't. Because if he were to actually say this person did this to Charlie Kirk and that was tormenting him about Israel, if he were to say that, now he has to prove it. What if the guy he talks about comes out and says, no, I never did that? What if he has to prove that and he can't? Then that discredits the entire theory. So he has to be vague about it. The vaguer the claim, the harder it is to refute. And that's by design. Here's another trick that they use. They appeal to our sense of tribalism, right? Like if you don't believe in this conspiracy theory, or if you even question it, then maybe you're not one of us. Maybe you're not a real libertarian. Maybe you're a rhino. Maybe you're not really one of us, so we probably shouldn't listen to you. As a matter of fact, Candace Owens used this very tactic. She posted a tweet saying, be very wary and suspicious of the people who are already telling us to stop asking questions about the Charlie Kirk assassination. Here's the thing, nobody's telling her not to ask questions. They're telling her to stop spouting BS in the form of questions. So the translation is, if you question them, you're not part of the tribe. You're suspect. You're a sellout. You're probably a Zionist shill or some BS like that. It's manipulative and it works until you're able to see through it. Now, again, I'm not saying that every single conspiracy theory is fake. Like I said, there are some that I believe, and there are even more that I'm actually open to believing because there might be some indications that they might be true. And a lot of times, things that are labeled as conspiracy theories end up being true. So, this isn't me saying that anybody who pushes a conspiracy theory is grifting or is lying to you. History has proven that sometimes the craziest theories actually turn out to be the truth. But there's a difference between critical thinking and intellectual laziness wrapped in hashtags or weird little tropes. If somebody wants to convince you that Charlie Kirk was murdered by Israel or by anyone else, then they need to provide the evidence. They need the sources. They need to answer the questions, not dodge them. You need to force them into making specific statements. The thing is, when you're being confronted with these theories, what you should be doing is taking it with a grain of salt, question them just like you question the government, question everyone. You got to look for the facts, not for vibes. I understand that sometimes things can feel true, or you hear, the government did this, and you might think, yeah, that tracks. I do that all the time. I mean, if you tell me the government did something bad, I'm already like, okay, the government has to prove to me that it didn't. And I'm okay with making the government be guilty until proven innocent because they're not just one person. So they don't get the same benefit of the doubt. But even then, I mean, seriously, I'm still going to want some evidence, right? Because I don't like being manipulated by anybody, whether it's the government or whether it's a conspiracy grifter or what have you. So you got to question the people who are asking questions. If they are grifters, they will completely fall apart once you do this. And that's why we have to be diligent about what we allow ourselves to believe. Just because something might confirm your biases doesn't make it true. And you don't want to be deceived. Well, some people do. Some people do want to be lied to. I'm not talking to those people right now. I'm talking about people who want the truth. When the loudest voices are pushing lies to build their brands, you don't have to fall for it. You can be the one who thinks critically. You're the one who can demand better. You're the one who can ask questions right back at them and put them on the defensive so that they actually have to prove their case. And if they do provide evidence, great. Take a look at that evidence. See if it's credible. They might be right. So that's all I'm saying. I'm just saying that we need to be more diligent about making sure that we're not falling for these lies, especially with something like the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Because this is, I do believe, and I've said this in a previous episode, that this is a seismic event in political discourse. And unfortunately, I think that there will probably be even more violence on both sides. And we can't afford to be in a position where these conspiracy grifters are pushing more outrage, pushing more division just to pad their pockets. Remember, they don't care about you. They don't care about the country. All they care about is attention, clout, clicks, and cash. Don't let them deceive you. I'll catch you on the flip side. And until next time, stay free, stay principled, and most importantly, stay ungovernable.